go out on the journey of awakening, go out on the journey of enlightenment. And they sort of map out, getting a glimpse of it, getting it more stably, getting it more thoroughly, getting more deeply, getting it to the point where it all vanishes, there's nothing at all, but then come back to normal life and just be normal. So the end of Zen is like no more Zen, no more awakening, no more enlightenment, just leading your life in the most ordinary, down-to-earth way.
What does it take to do the impossible? What does it take to level up your game like never before? What does it take for individuals, organizations, for even institutions to achieve paradigm shifting? Nothing is ever the same again, breakthroughs.
Our mission is to decode the neurobiology of flow and cognitive peak performance. Access the minds of maverick scientists, groundbreaking innovators, and world-leading experts to understand what it takes to achieve ultimate human performance, so you can feel your best, perform your best, and accomplish your boldest goals. I'm your host, Rian Doris, and together with best-selling author Stephen Kotler, I present to you Flow Research Collective Radio.
Shukman, welcome to Flow Research Collective Radio. It's really great to have you here.
Hey, thanks for having us. It's a delight.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm gonna start with a breakdown of your bio. So Henry teaches meditation, mindfulness, and awakening practices to a wide range of students from all traditions and walks of life. You are a Zen master in the Sanbo Zen lineage and the spiritual director at Mountain Cloud Zen Center. And you've got an MA from Cambridge and an M Lit from St. Andrews, with several award-winning books that you've written on poetry and fiction, which we'll be talking about today. And your essays have been published in the New York Times, Outside, and Tricycle, with your poems having also appeared in the New Republic, The Guardian, Sunday Times, London Review of Books, and I believe you have one upcoming in the New Yorker as well. You also taught poetry for several years at the Institute of American Indian Arts and at Oxford Brookes University. And you've taught meditation at Google, Harvard Business School, UBS, Esalen Institute, and many other venues. And we're almost there. It's a great bio. The final piece is that you have written about your own journey in a new book that we're going to talk about as well today, which is your memoir called One Blade of Grass, Finding the Old Road of the Heart, a Zen memoir. And you also created a new meditation program, Original Love, which aims to provide a broad, inclusive path of growth through meditation, which we will also touch on. To start us off, I'm going to read a quote that I really liked from One Blade of Grass, and I would love to hear your thoughts on it. And then maybe to build on this quote, you could tell us about your, is it fair to call it an awakening, whatever we want to call it, peak experience that seemed to be very pivotal for you in your younger years. And the quote from One Blade of Grass is, "I learned what the word happy meant. It meant there was no weight in your belly. And if you asked yourself how you felt, the answer spontaneously came back, good." So I'm curious if you could elaborate that upon that, and feel free to tell the story as well of how you got into this whole world.
Yeah. Hey, thanks. So if I just dive right in there, I was 19 years old. I'd grown up with very severe eczema and a kind of unhappy home situation in the UK. And I went abroad to work, on a gap year when I was 18 and then 19. And I also traveled for a while. This was in South America. And at a certain point near the end of the trip, I found myself completely alone on a beach, watching the sun set. And actually it was just going down. And there was, I had a moment of something quite extraordinary in terms of my own experiences. So completely unlike anything I'd felt before, where it really felt like the world as I knew it and myself as I knew myself both sort of disappeared and were kind of, it was as if I'd sort of seen through them to a single fabric. It felt something like that, of which I was inextricably a part, and which seemed to be what all things were kind of were, you know. And it was utterly beautiful and utterly, it felt like it resolved everything, you know. Felt like I'd seen kind of the truth, is what it felt like. And I actually had not been a person who was seeking anything like that. I would never have called myself a seeker back in those days. I was just a pretty rational, sort of empiricist, kind of positivist sort of a guy. I'd grown up in Oxford when my parents were both professors, in a very, very kind of, academically minded household. And I bought into that completely. I was interested in, what could be known really, and studied and evidenced and that sort of thing, and not at all in, spirituality. But this moment just happened, and I couldn't deny it. I couldn't deny the sense of truth that it brought, and nor the extraordinary happiness that came from it, that was just really unlike anything I'd known before. Just a total, it seemed like a sort of unimpeachable happiness, a happiness that could not be touched or damaged in any way or distorted in any way, because it was sort of just what was ultimately true. It's kind of what it felt like. So, it was an extraordinary liberative experience. It was beyond anything. I mean, I'd had moments of great happiness before and fulfillment, and I found a lot of that in the teenage writing I'd done, but this was of a different order entirely.
So two follow-up questions to that. One is, to what degree has it persisted? Did it evaporate completely and then take a decade to scramble back to it? Has it pretty much stuck around all the way till now, or has it changed? And the second question is, upon reflection, do you have a sense of what may have triggered it?
Yeah, thanks. For the first question, the answer is not at all. It hung around for a few weeks in a most blissful way. It's like I was just kind of empty and filled with a sense of love, really, love for everything, And but then I went home. As I said, I'd been abroad, and kind of as soon as I got home, all the habit patterns, all the thought patterns and feeling patterns of my childhood just kind of came back with greater force than ever, and I had a real breakdown, actually, and I was really unhappy for several years, kind of clawing my way through life, sort of thing, just stumbling, from duty to duty, as it felt like, just barely managing to hold on. And then I got lucky in that I found my way to meditation early on, and that started to help me immediately. And it then actually I got kind of better enough that I could start thinking about that extraordinary moment. What did it mean, and how could I get back there? And then that began, kind of a long search, and it took actually years of training in different traditions, but especially in the Zen tradition, which really knows about that kind of reality glimpsed in a moment like that. It took decades, actually, probably kind of 2 decades to finally have sort of really, I'd say in a sense, a sort of deeper kind of shift that has made that sense of a marvelous spaciousness and kind of hollowness in a beautiful way available. Not it's not, I wouldn't claim to always be aware of it, but I think I can say that any time I remember to sort of just touch in with it, it's there. It's such a great, it's such an asset, really, to have access to, in a way I could kind of maybe call it a sort of dimension that's so free, so empty in the old Buddhist term, because it's really, in a sense, nothing there. But somehow to taste it, to remember it, to feel it, is always brings a sense of extraordinary well-being and kind of a love, actually, and a kind of joy, and often, you know, compassion as well comes with it. And it took ages to make it more accessible, stably accessible. And then I could say that at the time, I was completely alone on this beach, and there was something just magical about recognizing that I could not see another human being anywhere nearby, and I mean anywhere at all. You know, they weren't in my field of vision. I was all alone, and it suddenly gave me this sort of permission. It's what it felt like to sort of maybe put down some kind of part of my mind that would normally be primed for interacting. I just dropped it. It hit me then as an immense relief to be all alone. It was just the world and me. And I was also quite happy because although I was young, I'd finished the first draft of what became my first book. And, you know, I had a sense of sort of, you know, accomplishment at having finished that. That was also, I guess, a relief. And so I was in quite a good space, you know, internally. I was just primed for, you know, like you said, you know, I'd been a poet. Actually, I'm not sure I said this, but I've been a poet since I was young, you know, early teens. I mean, meaning that I just used poetry, and I devoured poetry and wrote it and kind of used it to sort of interact with the world a little more intimately, is how it felt. And so I was, in some way, I might claim to have habituated myself to kind of studying, you know, my limited way, kind of studying my perceptions, you know, studying perception itself. And I was doing that at the time. I was really looking at the light on the water, you know, on the ocean there, and I just got fascinated by it. And I suddenly realized that, you know, I didn't really know what I was looking at, or what the process of seeing really was. Was it all generated in the mind? Was there actually stuff out there? And if there was stuff out there, what did it really look like, since it was only light, you know, bounced, triggering the optical nerve? What was really there? And as I was just kind of pondering, you know, what is it to really be seeing something? And suddenly, just, you know, the act of seeing it as a separate entity, a sort of separate consciousness viewing, you know, a separate or distinguishable object out there, that just collapsed. And that was what triggered it, actually.
So one of the topics that we've been interested about, myself and Stephen, and by the way, I forgot to mention in your bio that I just found out that you and Stephen spoke when Stephen was writing his book West of Jesus, which is a fun coincidence. But one of the topics we've been really interested in, and that we've been looking at with Dr. Andrew Newberg, who's often thought to be the founder of neurotheology, and he's a neuroscientist at Jefferson University, is enlightenment and flow. And when in flow, one of the things that happens is our sense of self goes offline and quietens down, and we get this sort of sense of absorption in the activity and selflessness. And one simple way potentially to think about enlightenment in contrast to that is as that characteristic of flow, the decreased sense of self, but in a more enduring sense, potentially outside of a specific flow state. I'm curious if you feel there is accuracy there. And I'm also really curious about how you conceptualize the concept of enlightenment, and whether you think it's even, you know, real, so to speak.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I do think that there's a sort of dimensions of our reality, dimensions of our experience that, you know, traditionally get this label of being let's say an enlightened view. I just have no doubt that they are real. Whether there's a perfectly enlightened person who's constantly in a state of full enlightenment or something, I have no idea. I'm certainly not. And I don't really, in a way, I don't really aspire to be. You know, in the Zen tradition, I mean, well, actually, before I go to that, let me just say this. I'm very interested in exactly the same topic. What's the relationship between flow and awakening with a capital A, or enlightenment? And the way I'd see it is maybe something like this, that obviously they're very closely related to one another. And I agree, it's all about the sense of self and it going offline. I'd say that in a clear sort of awakening or enlightenment, if I usually use the word awakening, actually, it just seems a little less of a reach, you know, but if we dare use the word, if I dare use the word enlightenment, I'd say that in any clear enlightenment experience, and I'm saying that to distinguish it from enlightenment as an enduring condition or state or trait, but in an experience that we could call an enlightenment experience, in Zen, they say that either of two things happen. The first is that you clearly see that what you've taken your sense of self to be and have sort of believed in and identified with and kind of given your allegiance to, it's never really been there the way you thought it had been there. So it's not necessarily that the self goes quiet or dormant or offline. You see right through it. You see that this sense of me that's so convincing and sort of persistent, you know, actually when you suddenly just see that it was just a mirage, it was just an idea, and it can just vanish. I mean, when you see that it's only ever been a thought, really, it's only ever been a notion, it vanishes. Now, you know, of course, in most cases, it comes right back, you know, whether it's a few minutes, hours, days, or occasionally weeks later, it comes back, or maybe even months or years, but it will come back in most cases, you know. So that's one possibility in quote unquote enlightenment. But another possibility is actually that it's not so much about the self, although it may also be, but you also see that the very world you're looking at has also been a kind of mirage. Now, people don't like hearing this, understandably, and unless you undergo a glimpse like that, you know, you don't really need to worry about it, you know, but you can suddenly see that what you had, you know, understood to be this sort of solid world in front of you, all around you, and you know, you're made of, actually also is a kind of mirage. And it's they say in Zen that it's easier to see the first than the second. And then there's a third possibility, which is that you see through both at the same time. And that's the real sort of, in Zen, that's the real sort of deeper enlightenment experience, where it's very hard to, I think once that's happened, where both self and world vanish, it's very, very overwhelming, and sort of, it goes very deep into you to have that happen. And I think afterwards, it's so beautiful to be alive, because you sort of know that everything's kind of coming out of nothing. And that is what I think can become the more durable state in Zen, that's what Zen training seems to be aiming for, is that, you know, to guide us or help us find our own way to just dropping everything, really everything. And then it really changes us, you know, from the inside out. And that's where the durability comes from.
Yeah, to poke at the durability piece a little bit more, I'm curious about the degree to which you see, you know, a persistent state of selflessness in the Zen sense as being on a spectrum versus being a binary, you know, on off. Maybe you could speak to that a little bit, because often the way enlightenment is talked about in spiritual texts is that, you know, you're not awake and then you're awake. And I'm curious if that's been your experience or what your thoughts are there.
Yeah, I mean, I actually think that it's a hazardous way to think about it, because I think, you know, even if that were in some cases true and how it happens, even then, actually, that we're multifaceted creatures and we've got to grow and learn in many ways. It's not actually, it's hazardous to think that there's just one stop. If I just get this thing, I'm going to be a wonderful being thereafter. We know how hazardous it can be to think like that, when people who probably gurus, the stories of gurus who probably were enlightened in that regard, but there's other dimensions to a human being that they needed to work on as well, and they ended up abusing people and behaving in basically thoroughly harmful and unenlightened ways. So I do think it's hazardous to have an ideology of just like, get over this hump and you're done. But on the other hand, and also, let me add that if I look at my own biography, like, to get to anything like some kind of turning point like that, or fulcrum point when life tips from being one way to being another way, it took such a long time, and even then it's not perfectly done by any means. So I think that the idea that there could be just a single one-off thing and you're done, God, maybe there have been people for whom that was true, but I would imagine it's incredibly rare. So I think it's much wiser to think about a spectrum, and I also think it's wiser to think about it being it can be kind of on and off. I'm clearer, I'm less clear. I used to, for years, I'd go and meet a teacher once a week, and we'd do a koan together, like a Zen, these Zen koans. That was a big part of my training. And, I'd no doubt I'd go kind of a bit sort of grumpy or slightly down or frustrated about something in my life, whatever it might be. I'd have this meeting with a teacher, and boom, I'd come out far clearer than I went in. So, and it would be like that, sort of clearer, less clear for years.
So you can kind of jump down the spectrum a little bit.
Yeah. I think it's, I don't know. I these days, I really think it's, I just feel it's, as somebody who, put quite a bit of energy into the enlightenment side of things at a certain point in my life, for a long period of my life. These days, I think actually it's really important to be more balanced and sort of rounded in approach. And I've done a lot of therapy over the years as well, and I still do from time to time, and I'm really happy that I do. It's like I just have this sense that, at least for me, and I think many that I meet with, we are multidimensional creatures, and we're going to be, we may get clear in some area of life, and that doesn't mean we won't be. That doesn't mean we'll be clear in all other areas. And it's, we've got these beautiful, complex hearts that contain a lot, contain multitudes, and we have to tend them. And it's true that getting this kind of awakening experiences, or sort of dropping into that, falling away in that sort of way, creates a whole lot more space. But it doesn't mean that we don't have work to do in other ways.
A couple of questions. I'm going to come to practice and what advice you have for people on that front. Before we go there, though, one of the things I rarely hear meditation teachers talk about, at least in a way that is satisfying to me, is the specific difference in what day-to-day life is like, let's say 10 years, 20 years, 30 years into practice, when you're further down the spectrum, like you're, articulating, versus at the beginning. In what way is it different now when you stub your toe, or when, someone cuts across you in traffic, or when you get really upsetting news? I'm curious if you could speak to the specifics of how your experience has changed with years of practice versus what it used to be.
Yeah. Okay, well, the first thing I can say, the biggest thing for me was, if there was a single moment, that I can point to, the hour and a minute virtually, when when I went through the biggest shift that I've been through, and it knocked out all the kind of anxiety wrapped up in my career ambitions. I'd been, since quite young, I'd had quite a bit of, ambition, and it caught, I was often sort of anxious about it, sometimes exalted about it, thrilled about it. I get some poetry prize, I'm delighted, and somebody else gets the prize next year and I don't like it. That kind of thing, and fretting about, will I publish this thing here or not, and how will it sell? And that was knocked out. It was just taken out, and it hasn't really come back. It occasionally, since I published this recent book, every so often there's been just a little remembering kind of what it's like to be fretting about that stuff, and it doesn't get traction. And that for me was quite a big transformation, actually, because it had been.
When you say it doesn't get traction, I'm curious what that looks like.
Well, I could just I could see, oh yeah, that old habit of like, when's there going to be a reprint or something? I don't know what it might be. I'm trying to think of a good example, because it's pretty rare. And then realizing right away, this is arising in the midst of a great space, and it's just kind of nothing. It's just a little impulse it's just like watching the sort of a flow of a lava lamp arise and change shape and fall back down again. It doesn't constitute anything sort of that I can really identify with, and instead there's just, I remember, and I touch in again with this, basically a kind of boundless spaciousness. But even spaciousness isn't quite the right word, because it's so still. It's so right here. It doesn't have dimension. And when I say it's not something that can be named. It's just Zen calls it original nature, but the words don't get it. So that's what it's like.
Is one way to describe it potentially that the degree to which you are anchored in the witness is much stronger, and as a result you're less susceptible to kind of getting pulled in or identified to the phenomena that is arising, whether it's thoughts or feelings or sensations? Is that
it's comparable to that. Being the witness, the mindful, equanimous witness, the free, quiet, peaceful witness is a marvelous thing to learn, to inhabit, to be stable in. But this, I would say, is not the same, because it's no witness. There's really no witness, and that's again, maybe not a popular thing to say, but there is. I mean, I regard that witness consciousness as the sort of deep aspiration of mindfulness, but we can go further than that, where there really isn't even that, and we just can't say what there is, and it's much freer even than witnessing. There's just what's arising, no witness. That's really, I mean, Zen goes down on a limb here. It was some other forms of Buddhism do as well, but it's it doesn't quite stay within the easily I don't know, understandable territory, where that our minds can get around, because wrap themselves around, because there is we can go beyond what we can understand in practice. And I think in a way that's where the real deepest sort of freedom and joy and love come from, beyond understanding.
I'm curious if you could give an example, Henry, of a scenario or a situation in which the witness experience is distinct from what you're referring to. I'm struggling to wrap my head around what the difference would be experientially between just witnessing phenomena from kind of the seat of awareness to not even having the witness or the seat of awareness. So yeah.
No, good question. I mean, it's really about, and it's honestly really, this is hard stuff to convey, except through training. with people find this through, for example, Zen training and koan training. You can get to this place where there just isn't a seat of awareness. There's just what is arising, and there isn't a separatable witness or consciousness or awareness of any kind. I mean, the you know, for whatever it's worth, the texts, you know, like there's a famous scripture, you know, called the Heart Sutra. It's a sort of a short document from early Buddhism of around 2,000 years ago about, and it says in it, you know, no mind, no consciousness, like actually to have the sense of, because a lot of us in the meditation world, you know, there's a lot of emphasis on awareness, consciousness, and finding non-dual awareness, an awareness that's all pervasive and things, which is great. I am totally into that. But it is also possible to somehow see through even that, where there really isn't even an awareness. And there's just what is arising. And people would, you know, make what they will of that, but it is really, it's for real.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, is that kind of your steady state these days?
No, I want to be totally flexible. I roam around in different states, you know, and I'm very happy to do that. There's a Zen master, actually, a famous old guy called Rinzai, who said, I hope this isn't going too much into the weeds, but I'll just put it out there. He said, sometimes there's a person and no world. Sometimes there's no person and there is a world. Sometimes there's no person and no person. Sorry, there's no person and no world. And sometimes there's the person and the world. And all four are fine. So you know, there's this map of Zen called the ox herding pictures. And without getting into them, but to sum them up, they say, yeah, go out on the journey of awakening, go out on the journey of enlightenment. And they sort of map out, you know, getting a glimpse of it, getting it more stably, getting it more thoroughly, getting more deeply, getting it to the point where it all vanishes, there's nothing at all, but then come back to normal life and just be normal. So the end of Zen is like no more Zen, no more awakening, no more enlightenment, just leading your life in the most ordinary, down-to-earth way. And they say it's kind of very hard to get there.
Yeah, and there's some sort of it's sort of the simple, complex, simple journey in a sense.
Yes.
And there's usually a difference between the first simple and the second simple, even if they seem very similar. So so I'm going to come back to the psychotherapy piece and the practice piece in a moment, but before we shift off the experiential topic, I'm curious to ask you about how certain categories of experience have changed. And one that I'm particularly curious about, given our audience, is actually related to discipline, willpower, drive, you know, work ethic. I'd love to hear how your relationship to motivating and catalyzing action out of yourself has changed over the years as you've moved kind of more into the witness and then, you know, beyond it as well.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so, you know, I don't hold myself up as an example at all, but what seemed to happen for me was that I got my ambition blown out of the water, and then what replaced it was a sense of a kind of love. I don't know what else to call it. A sort of loving silence and a loving peace I didn't feel like it was anything to do with me. It was just something that I'd sort of found, I'd got to, that was already here. I just hadn't really stably inhabited it before, or vice versa, it inhabited me. I don't know, but I was kind of connected to it or part of it. And then I wanted to just do whatever little things I could do to help. And I started doing hospice work, you know, in the best I could. You know, I don't know whether I was any good at it or whatever, but I used to do it and just hang out with people in their final months. And I started going to the prison to teach meditation, or you know, I mean, I say teach, just sort of try to help people do whatever meditation they wanted to do. And then I was, you know, I was asked by the, you know, my teachers to start formally sort of being a Zen teacher, and I did, and it's kind of morphed into not just Zen now, but sort of mindfulness and associated practices, basically, including Zen, insofar as you can distinguish Zen from a more general picture. And so, you know, the orientation moved for me, or the motivation really just became less, I suppose, in a sense, it became less about my own projects. And now some people would say, well, I don't want that, you know. But for me, it's been a very happy thing. It's been a very liberating thing. Actually, funny enough, just now, I mean, literally in the last 6 months or something, I've been getting more interested in, once again, sort of, well, not just writing poems, but actually wanting to, I'm thinking about publishing a new book of poems, actually. So I'm sort of, I mean, that is a little bit more like a project for Henry. And so I'm kind of carefully watching, you know, how much do old habits around that kick in, and giving space for that to happen. But so far, I feel that the kind of poems I'm writing and wanting to share are intended to help people in their lives, and also in their practice, you know, whatever. They've got a sort of, I guess, a kind of contemplative flavor, you know.
I'm curious, Henry, if you have a poem at the ready that you'd be open to sharing with the audience. No pressure to, but
yeah. Let me. I hadn't. Damn, you put me on the spot. Let me see. I'm going to pull one up.
Take your time.
Passenger. When the last moorings have been released, the line swung loose, the hull has parted from the quay, and you feel the new flow carry you, as if it had been waiting just for you all this time. Don't imagine it's you who engineered this current, which, although so smooth, has the unseen power of a great river. It's like that first time you swam, when you were 7 or 8, and you lifted your toes clean off the bottom of the pool, and to your astonishment, the water held you. You hovered like a cloud in the sky, your shadow flickering over the blue land beneath. So now all you've done is give yourself over against all instincts, and found that you're held, and that what carries you knows where to take you, and there's no reason not to let it. And you do. And in doing so, you realize you've just found the answer that had always eluded you.
Wow, that's gorgeous. That actually beautifully answered the question that I asked you as well about discipline and drive. So thank you for that. Yeah, that's lovely. Is that in the new book that's coming out, the new poetry book?
The book to come, yeah, the book, it will be.
Amazing.
But the book is it's a cluster of poems right now. I'm feeding my way to the ordering and the, you know, what's going to be included and what not, and so on. So it's a little ways off still.
Yeah, it looks like it's coming along really nicely based on that one. So the next question, which relates to this, is when you are engaging in creative pursuits like writing that poem, for example, or writing your recent book, One Blade of Grass, or maybe preparing for a meditation program like Original Love, do you find that the quality of mind that has been cultivated through the meditation practice increases your susceptibility, or the ease with which you're able to get into a, flow state, which I, see as distinct from a meditative state or kind of a baseline witness state. When you're engaging in those pursuits, is it easier to slide into immersion and absorption within the creative process?
I have just no doubt about that. Absolutely. And I push it way back to, as soon as I started meditating back, my early 20s, it started helping my writing. Because number one, in the stillness of sitting, or just in the, the daily practice of being still certain time each morning, stuff would just come. I'd come toward the end of a sit, and lo and behold, a phrase just pops into the mind about something that I've been working on, and it's a better way to put it. It's the next step, and boom, there it is. It just comes up. And I think for creative people, I know a lot of creative people meditate and have talked about this, that there's a natural ease in sort of plumbing the depths of the well that you want your creative impulses to come from, and carrying the form that they need to carry and need to be expressed in. They seem to just come up more naturally by themselves. It's like just getting an email, and I have no doubt that meditation helps with that. And I think it's kind of makes sense, because you're settling more deeply into sort of quieter consciousness that's more receptive. So you're more open, you're more available, you're more accessible to whatever wants to come. And since that was true for a lot of my meditating and creative life, until this sort of, rather, I think of it as sort of deeper shift that happened, where it's just knocked that out. I was just sitting every day, and there's nothing but silence, and it's marvelous, and it's full of love. And I didn't want to write. I wanted to act, just be as helpful as I could. And it's only sort of what is it, like 12 or 14 years after that I started to come around to thinking, well, maybe one of the acts of helpfulness that I might offer is a book, and I hope I'm right, but it seems like this book, One Blade of Grass, kind of, I've had so many people write to me about it. It seems like it has kind of encouraged people, actually, who are on a spiritual path. So maybe that's another way of helping, that I'm finally getting around to believing in again, kind of thing.
Yeah, plumbing the creative well is a very nice way to put it. I did my thesis in my master's in neuroscience on the relationship between flow and meditation, and there's a lot of initial empirical data that shows that there's a correlation between state and trait mindfulness and flow proneness, or your disposition to being able to access a flow state, which makes total basic sense. So yeah,
exactly. So that's sort of like being in flow without having to be in a challenging or activity. You can just live in it.
Right.
As you're making a cup of tea, simply making a cup of tea in flow. You're moving through your day in flow, speaking in flow. You could. That's certainly a fruit of meditation.
The next question I wanted to ask you about is the practice one, the how to make it happen question. So I did a 10-day silent Zen meditation retreat about 2 months ago, and found it to be just an incredible experience. Came out of it feeling just amazing in the ways that you're describing, and lasted about 3 days, and then I was back to completely back to baseline. Weirdly, my meditation practice was actually worse afterwards. I don't know why that happened, but it was a whole thing. And so, yeah, I'm curious, for the listeners, And selfishly for myself, let's say, for example, you've been, sort of trying to meditate for 5 or so years with apps and bits of 20-minute meditations here and there, but there hasn't been kind of a continual arc of progression or continuation, which I think is the frustration for a lot of people. How do you start to get into a practice that kind of builds and compounds and deepens, rather than it just feeling like these isolated instances of sort of trying to practice for a few months and then back to square one with a slightly different equivalent version a few months later?
Yeah, that's a great question. Here's a couple of thoughts on that. One is, honestly, just one interaction with a teacher, might really help. Just one session with a teacher or a coach who knows the terrain really well. And that might set you up for a couple of years, And the reason it might do that, and maybe you can get this without an interaction with a teacher, is becoming more aware of the possibilities of the whole path. There's been, rightly, so much emphasis on mindfulness as essentially a kind of therapeutic and performance enhancing intervention. But there's so much more. It's great that it can offer those things, and it can. And but it even that will probably take a little bit of guidance and certainly some practice, but that's just the beginning of a path. The clearer we are that there's an incredible journey to be made. I would honestly say the journey of a lifetime, because it's a journey into finding out just totally unexpected things about who and what we are. And if you recognize that, if you know that you're like a pilgrim, or I always felt like a sort of ingenue trying to find his way in the mountains, and suddenly somebody points out a path, a trail, and man, you can go up this trail, and there is a mountain, and it's for real, and the view is going to be different from the top, and actually, by the way, you're not going to stick around at the top. Got to come all the way back down to your ordinary life, and it's going to look different when you do that. And to really know that this is a transformative path. It's much more than just learning some skills that can help us cope and manage. It's much more than that. And sort of the more we know that, the more inspiration there is, or maybe to go further, and that can, encourage us to, hell, I want to keep going with this. I believe in, the path as outlined, but I can't do that if I haven't even heard what the whole path really is, if you see what I mean. And that's one thing, guidance that lets you know about the whole path. But secondly, actually, it's interesting what you're saying about the retreat. I was a sort of diehard believer in retreats, for much of my own training, and both as a student and now as a teacher, it's been a mainstay of what I've done. But actually, recently, I've started seeing tremendous benefits in courses. We've been offering this Original Love program has courses there. Once a week, you have a 2-hour session. Hundreds of people come, and they're doing it in their living room or their kitchen or their bedroom. And what's great about that is that where you really want the input is right in the middle of your ordinary life, because we all know, you can go deep and whatever, you can really cast off during a retreat, but how much does it actually help where the rubber hits the road, which is in ordinary life? And these days, I think I haven't lost faith in retreats. I do think, they're immensely valuable, but there's this other way of having like weekly session with a teacher that actually, can galvanize us right in the midst of ordinary life, where we most want to be galvanized and encouraged, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. More integrated, closer to the ultimate baseline you're trying to shift.
Exactly.
What is a approximate amount of time or sort of schedule that you've seen work well for people to have enough consistent momentum to have the practice stick? Is it, is it an hour a morning to really make a meaningful difference? Is it 20 minutes twice a day. I'm curious what you've seen generally work best as a rule of thumb.
Like sort of minimum effective dose, really. Well, I do think actually the two things you said are really good things to aspire to. 20 minutes twice a day was the recipe that TM had, Transcendental meditation, which was an immensely successful attempt to scale meditation back in the 60s. That they hit millions of people, I think, in the 60s and 70s. And although things may have moved on a bit, that mindfulness has sort of probably made that mantra-based kind of practice seem a little old school or something these days. But it had one thing right on, which was that it's where I started actually myself, as TM. They drilled it into you that, like, if you don't do this for 20 minutes twice a day, don't do it at all. You just have to do that, or you won't get any benefit from it. And that's probably rather a hardcore thing to say, but that was their line. And I actually think they were right, that there is a minimum effective dose, and it could be, of course, it'll vary for people, but I don't know. I think that was a really good shot at a kind of mean amount for a large section of the population. 20 minutes twice a day. But actually, in Zen, we don't do it like that. We want people to get the habit first. So we'll say, if somebody's new, just 5 minutes every day. And when you've done that for 3 weeks, make it 7 minutes every day. And then when you've done that for, a little while, bump it up to 10 minutes every day. And then see if you can get up to half an hour every morning, and then you might try to add a 15-minute sit in the evening as well, or something like that. The most important thing, I think, is that it be daily. Actually, it's and daily regardless. So we have to get the habit instilled. Seems like we have to let go of wanting it to be a really nice experience. We have to just do it regardless. So sometimes we sit and mind's just racing, and we can't seem to get any stillness, any centeredness, any handle on things. Doesn't actually matter. Just do it anyway, because there's some view that the mere fact of sitting still is sending a signal to the unconscious, regardless of what's going on in the conscious mind. The unconscious registers, basically he or she or they're not doing anything. They're sitting still. And that is actually more important than what we might judge to be the quality of a sit. And that's another thing we have to get rid of, is our assessing our sits. We have to just throw that out the window, as we're learning to do it regularly. Yeah.
That's really interesting as well about TM. I'm curious if that, given that you got your start there and given the kind of structured nature of it, whether that is actually sometimes a place you recommend people start. My experience, and this may have been why my practice got kind of almost negatively impacted by the retreat, the Zen prompts that were provided felt, for me at least, just too advanced. They were too minimal. Like it was kind of just nothing, basically. So I'm curious if TM sometimes is actually a good, starting point to build a practice, and then maybe you graduate from TM into Zen or something else after that.
Yeah, I think it could be, but it's got certain barriers to it. Like, you're going to get given a quote unquote sacred sound, that you sit with, and are you okay with having a strange mantra? We don't need it anymore. We know from mindfulness research that you don't really need a mantra to get the benefits of practice. I mean, what I feel is we're moving toward new formulations of the wisdom that's been encoded in these various great Asian traditions of meditation, and they're all meeting here. People are getting exposure to several of them here in the West, and I think we're going to be seeing new distillations, new iterations that surely grow out of these great traditions, but don't have the sectarianism that they often come with, that don't have whatever, even in the traditions that claim to be just exclusively about meditation, there's usually a bit of doctrinal baggage, actually, once you scratch beneath the surface. So new forms that really don't have that are just for us. There's no kind of a institutional structure between us and our own spirituality. The spirituality I think we all seek is, we've got it already. It's just a matter of what are the instruments to help us uncover it, to find the intrinsic peace, love, wonder that that we do have already, but they're often hidden by our patterns of thought and so on. And also, I mean, very importantly, actually, also our intrinsic capacity to sort of handle difficulty. And by that I mean be open to heartbreak. I don't want a practice that closes our hearts. I want one that opens them even more, so that when we see suffering, when we ourselves suffer, when people close to us that we love are going through hard times, we are right there with them, feeling it. That's compassion, is really feeling with the suffering of others and wanting it to lighten, for sure, but not from a place of kind of I've got free of all that, I'm through all that, I'm above all
excessive
that.
detachment.
Yeah, right. Exactly. I think if we're not, really, I think an open heart is a broken heart. I think brokenheartedness, is somehow where we must all end up. I'm sorry to say, but I do believe it.
An open heart is a broken heart. I like that. Second last question for you, Henry. You mentioned psychotherapy, and one of my all-time favorite books is called Already Free by Bruce Tift. The subtitle is Buddhism Meets Psychotherapy on the Path to Liberation. And he basically talks about these two different tracks of development. On one side, he calls it the fruitional view, which would be sort of the meditative approach of kind of, this is a bit of a crude way to describe it, but, dissolving the self or sense of self. And then on the other side, he talks about the developmental approach, which is about sort of healing the self and all the, defense mechanisms or patterns that have accumulated in the self from childhood. And actually, I think it might have been in one of your past interviews, you talked about maybe it wasn't you, so correct me if I'm wrong here, but it may have been you, talked about the idea of the fruitional approach being about being comfortable with the pebble in your shoe, and the developmental approach being about taking the pebble out of your shoe. So I'm curious how you think about those two approaches. And, you mentioned that you have done psychotherapy, so I'm curious how you balanced those two sides of the coin over the years.
Yeah, thank you. I'm really glad you bring that up. It wasn't me. I like that. I like that analogy very much. I wish I could claim it, but I might use it myself. It's very good. And I really like the sound of that book. Actually, I didn't know it. I'm gonna order a copy right away, actually, because that's right where I'm at. Is that I think picking up really what I was saying earlier, we need to acknowledge that we grow in different dimensions, and yeah, there's the expansiveness and this kind of release and the opening up that of the meditative path can bring, but there's also this very human heart that needs tending. That it's not to say that the first doesn't include that in some way, but it's not the same to really go into our blocks and our dynamics and our, you know, the ways that we're caught in eddies of thought and feeling, and the issues, the interpersonal issues we have, really going into that. And you know, if it means going back to childhood trauma and things, then so be it. If it means doing somatic work and releasing trauma from the body, great. If it means and I did a lot of dream work that was very sort of trauma based. Actually, it was very powerful for me. It was very really a critical part of my journey, I think, and among other kinds of therapy. And I really feel that we want to be sure, or we want to be careful that our spiritual life, you know, isn't a form of avoidance. And it, you know, I, as somebody who's been pretty devoted to a spiritual path, I still know, I know that it can be. I mean, but the point is that, how can I put this? I don't, even though I think it's so important that we grow multidimensionally, you know, including the healing of our psyches that needs to happen, as well as to whatever extent we're drawn to the contemplative and, you know, path of great discovery of, you know, our place in the cosmos and stuff and who we really are. Great. But at the same time, doing the psychotherapeutic healing and releasing of ways that we're blocked and the blind spots we have, all of that. But the thing is, it's some people will say, well, you know, the term spiritual bypassing, you may have heard, you know, meaning getting so involved in a spiritual life that you're neglecting things that you should be attending to, you know, in other areas of life. It's sort of pretty much like, say, equivalent to workaholism, where, you know, somebody's just meditating so much, but actually they've got a lot of problems in their relationship with their partner, and somehow the meditation is kind of a way of avoiding dealing with those problems, you know. But the thing I want to say is that it doesn't mean the meditation is no good. It doesn't mean the, you know, even awakening sort of no good. It means that we're multifaceted. It just means that, you know, both are good. Both the psychotherapy is good and the practice toward awakening, or whatever it is that our spiritual path is giving us, you know, both are needed, both are good.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Definitely resonates. When I was a 1-year-old, funnily enough, I first learned to walk in an ashram in India. My parents used to go out there to meditate, and I felt that I encountered a lot of people early in life who only did one side of it, only did the fruitional, and had all sorts of crazy baggage, which always just, I don't know, it instilled a sense of the importance of tackling things from both sides in me as well. So yeah, cool. I like that you mentioned that too. And the final question, Henry, is a question about a question, which we ask a lot of our academic guests. And the question is, if you could immediately have all the research done on any topic, if you could click your fingers and have all the randomized control trials you could ever wish for, to answer any question that you have or have had for a long time, what would that question be?
Oh God, I'm waiting for the science of the really deep enlightenment to be understood, when there's just nothing left, and yet it's marvelous. I'd love that to be. I mean, it's going to happen. I think you know, I think the cognitive research, the neuroscience research, it can take us some way, and then I think it's going to meet physics at some point, you know, because it seems like, and it's a reckless thing to say, but it does seem like when you get into the really deeper experiences that meditation opens up, you know, you're touching on something that feels like the creation of the universe. I know that's a crazy thing. It sounds like a crazy thing to say, but I feel maybe it's true. You know, maybe it's true, because, you know, after it's all pouring into existence right now, in this very moment, is arising out of nothing right now. That's what I feel. And I don't, and it's, you know, you can read sort of I mean, so far as I can read, science books for lay people, physics for lay people, quantum mechanics for lay people, it seems some aspect of it's incongruent with what the physicists say. That's
a good one. I like that.
That's
a big one
for me.
Yeah, no, that's great. And before we jump off, I just want to mention originallove.org, which is the new meditation course, and then One Blade of Grass, Finding the Old Road of the Heart, a Zen memoir, which is your latest book. Is there anything you'd like to mention on the originallove.org front?
Rian, how soon is this likely to go out?
I think actually next week. Yeah.
Well, that's great timing, because we've got a new course starting August the 31st, which, funny enough, is on. It's on. You see, we got in Original Love, we have sort of different dimensions of practice that we look at, and one of them is flow and samadhi. And we've got a new course starting August 31st. It's a 6-week course on flow/samadhi. In other words, getting into beautiful states of ease and effortlessness, timelessness, maybe even selflessness through meditation, and I guide people to that and talk about it, and people ask questions. And so it's an experiential course, and you get 2 meditations a week, as well as a weekly 2-hour Sunday morning session, morning if you're in the US. And I'm very proud of this and happy about this meditation program, actually, because I think it's really trying to be well grounded, and and taking a sort of solid foundation that includes awakening, but also therapeutic mindfulness, opening to support more, and getting into absorption states, flow states that are akin to awakening, but maybe not quite the same thing, but close, teaching everything, or helping people discover through some guidance whatever can be offered that way. So I think it's an exciting program, I think.
Super. No, yeah, thanks for mentioning that. Originallove.org is the website for everyone. And I can see here, zone 3 samadhi and flow states. There you go. So that's great. And thanks so much, Henry. This was amazing. Really, really appreciate you sharing your attention and your wisdom with us. I've been really looking forward to this one for a long time. So,
hey, Rian, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be on the show. And please say hi to Stephen from me.
I will. I definitely will indeed.
If what you've heard on Flow Research Collective Radio has been helpful, please consider doing us a solid and leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you are listening to this. Reviews help us connect to a wider audience so we can get these peak performance principles out to more people.